Darren Walker stood in the courtroom, his hands gripping the edges of the defendant's table. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with judgment as the jury returned their verdict. He had been wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit, and though he had hoped for justice, the reality of his situation was crushing. The prosecution had painted him as guilty based on circumstantial evidence and preconceived notions, but Darren knew the truth. As the judge read out the verdict, "Guilty," the words echoed in Darren's mind, reverberating with a cruel finality. His heart sank, and the weight of the decision pressed down on him like a heavy shroud. The courtroom was filled with murmurs, the spectators watching with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Among them, a few smirked, satisfied with the outcome. Darren's lawyer, a public defender who seemed disinterested from the start, barely put up a fight during the trial. It was clear to Darren that the system wasn't designed to protect people like him, and his attorney's lackluster defense only confirmed his suspicions. As the judge pronounced the sentence, Darren's eyes met those of the prosecutor, who had been relentless in his pursuit of a conviction. The prosecutor's expression was smug, and Darren could almost feel the disdain radiating from him. To them, Darren wasn't just guilty of the charges. He was guilty of being who he was, a black man in a society where that alone could be a crime. After the sentencing, as Darren was led away in handcuffs, the prosecutor made a pointed remark under his breath, something about knowing his place. The words stung, a bitter reminder of the prejudice that had tainted the entire trial. Darren's heart burned with a mixture of anger, frustration, and deep sorrow. But even as he was led out of the courtroom, Darren made a silent vow. He wasn't going to let this injustice define him. He would return, and when he did, he would make sure that everyone who had doubted him, everyone who had humiliated him, would be forced to see the truth. He would prove them all wrong, not with anger or violence, but with a resilience that would leave them speechless. Darren's first days in prison were a blur of fear and uncertainty. The reality of being incarcerated for a crime he didn't commit was overwhelming, and he struggled to adjust to the harsh environment. The prison was filled with hardened criminals, and Darren, despite his inner strength, felt out of place and vulnerable. The other inmates sized him up quickly, recognizing that he wasn't like them. Some saw him as an easy target, but Darren's quiet determination and refusal to be intimidated earned him a grudging respect. He kept to himself, avoiding conflicts as much as possible, but the isolation weighed heavily on him. The cold, grey walls of the prison were a constant reminder of the injustice he had suffered. Despite the oppressive environment, Darren refused to let despair consume him. He knew that giving up would mean letting the system win, and he wasn't willing to let that happen. He spent hours in the prison library, immersing himself in books on law and civil rights. The more he read, the more he realized that his situation was far from unique. There were countless others who had been wrongfully convicted, just like him. Darren's resolve grew stronger with each passing day. He began to educate himself about the legal system, determined to find a way to fight back. He reached out to organizations that specialized in wrongful convictions, writing letter after letter, hoping that someone would take up his case. But the road to justice was long and difficult. Darren faced numerous setbacks, as appeals were denied and his pleas for help went unanswered. The prison system was designed to break people, to crush their spirits, but Darren held on to the one thing they couldn't take from him: hope. Late at night, when the prison was quiet, Darren would lie on his bunk and think about the life he had lost. He missed his family, his friends, and the freedom that had been stolen from him. But he also thought about the promise he had made to himself in the courtroom. He knew that he had to keep fighting, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of everyone who had been wronged by the system. One day, after months of relentless effort, Darren received a letter from a prominent civil rights lawyer who had taken an interest in his case. The lawyer, impressed by Darren's tenacity and the evidence of his innocence, agreed to represent him in an appeal. It was the breakthrough Darren had been waiting for, and it reignited his determination to clear his name. Darren knew that this was just the beginning of a long battle, but he was ready. He had been humiliated and wronged, but he had also grown stronger, smarter, and more resilient. The world had turned its back on him, but he was preparing to return to that world with a purpose that would leave everyone in awe. With the help of the civil rights lawyer, Darren's case was reopened, and the wheels of justice began to turn once more. It was a slow and grueling process, but for the first time since his conviction, Darren felt like he had a real chance at proving his innocence. The lawyer, a seasoned advocate for the wrongfully convicted, meticulously reviewed every detail of Darren's case, finding multiple inconsistencies and procedural errors that had been overlooked during the trial. As the appeal moved forward, Darren found himself back in court, facing the judge and prosecutors who had once condemned him. But this time, he wasn't alone. His lawyer was a formidable presence in the courtroom, challenging every piece of evidence that had been used to convict Darren. Witnesses were re-examined, and new testimonies were brought to light, including that of an unexpected ally. One day, as the appeal hearing was in full swing, a man stepped forward, offering crucial information that could change the course of Darren's case. He was a former police officer who had been involved in Darren's original investigation. Now retired and racked with guilt, he confessed that evidence had been tampered with to secure Darren's conviction. It was a bombshell revelation, and it sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The officer explained that pressure from higher-ups had led to the manipulation of key evidence, and that he had stayed silent out of fear for his career. But the weight of his conscience had grown unbearable over the years, and when he learned of Darren's appeal, he knew he had to come forward. Darren sat in stunned silence as the officer made his confession. It was a moment of vindication, but also one of deep anger. The knowledge that his life had been shattered because of someone else's cowardice was difficult to bear. But Darren also knew that this confession was the key to his freedom. The judge, visibly shaken by the officer's testimony, ordered an immediate review of the evidence. The prosecution's case began to unravel as more and more discrepancies were revealed. It became clear that Darren had been the victim of a gross miscarriage of justice. The appeal hearing stretched on for days, with the defense systematically dismantling the case against Darren. The media, which had largely ignored Darren's plight, began to take notice, and soon his story was making headlines. People across the country were outraged by the injustice, and support for Darren began to grow. As the hearing drew to a close, it was clear that the tide had turned in Darren's favor. The judge, after reviewing all the new evidence, declared that there were sufficient grounds to overturn the conviction. Darren was granted a retrial, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope that his nightmare might finally be coming to an end. But Darren knew that the fight wasn't over yet. The retrial would be another battle, and he needed to be prepared. He had already been through hell, but he had emerged stronger and more determined than ever. And now, with the truth on his side and the support of a growing movement, he was ready to face whatever came next. The day of the retrial arrived, and the courtroom was packed. Reporters, supporters, and curious onlookers filled the seats, eager to witness the unfolding of what had become a highly publicized case. Darren entered the courtroom with his head held high, knowing that this time he was fighting not just for his freedom, but for justice. As the proceedings began, the atmosphere was charged with tension. The prosecution, faced with the collapse of their original case, had regrouped and was determined to maintain the conviction. They presented their arguments with force, but this time they were met with a defense that was equally prepared and relentless. One by one, witnesses were called to the stand. This time, their testimonies painted a very different picture than the one presented in the first trial. Darren's lawyer carefully guided each witness through their statements, highlighting the inconsistencies and contradictions that had been ignored before. Among the witnesses was the former police officer who had come forward during the appeal. His testimony was powerful and devastating to the prosecution's case. He detailed the pressure he had faced to alter evidence, and his voice cracked with emotion as he described the guilt he had carried for years. His confession left no doubt in the minds of those present that Darren had been wrongfully convicted. But it wasn't just the officer's testimony that made an impact. Darren himself took the stand, speaking for the first time in his own defense. With a calm and measured voice, he recounted the events that had led to his arrest, his experience during the trial, and the years he had spent in prison. His words were filled with pain, but also with a quiet strength that resonated throughout the courtroom. Darren's lawyer then called several character witnesses, including friends, family members, and former colleagues, who testified to Darren's integrity and the impact his conviction had on their lives. Their emotional testimonies brought many in the courtroom to tears, and it became clear that Darren was not just a defendant, but a man whose life had been unjustly torn apart. The turning point came when the defense introduced new forensic evidence that had not been available during the original trial. Advanced DNA testing, which had not been used at the time, conclusively proved that Darren could not have been involved in the crime for which he had been convicted. The evidence was irrefutable, and the courtroom erupted in gasps as it was presented. The prosecution, now faced with an insurmountable defense, struggled to maintain their case. Their arguments became increasingly desperate, and it was clear to everyone in the room that they were fighting a losing battle. As the retrial drew to a close, Darren's lawyer delivered a powerful closing argument, emphasizing the grave injustice that had been done and the need to correct it. The prosecution, in contrast, could offer little more than a weak rebuttal, their case having been thoroughly dismantled. The judge, after carefully considering all the evidence, delivered the verdict. With a stern expression, he declared that Darren was not guilty of the charges against him. The conviction was overturned, and Darren was finally a free man. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause as Darren stood there, overcome with emotion. He had fought a long and difficult battle, but he had emerged victorious. The sense of relief was overwhelming, and as he turned to embrace his family and supporters, tears streamed down his face. But even in this moment of triumph, Darren knew that his journey was far from over. The world outside the courtroom was still filled with challenges, and he would have to rebuild his life from the ground up. But now, he had the support of a community that had rallied behind him, and he was determined to make the most of his second chance. After the retrial, Darren stepped out of the courthouse as a free man, but the world he re-entered was not the one he had left behind. Years had passed, and though the weight of the wrongful conviction had been lifted, Darren knew that reintegrating into society would be a complex journey. The first few days were overwhelming. Reporters clamored for interviews, eager to capture his story, while well-wishers from the community reached out, offering support. Darren's face was plastered across newspapers and television screens, symbolizing both a tragic miscarriage of justice and a powerful triumph over adversity. Yet, despite the flood of attention, Darren remained focused on one thing: reclaiming his life. He returned to the neighborhood where he had grown up, a place filled with memories, both joyful and painful. The streets were familiar, yet they felt different, almost foreign, after all those years. Old friends welcomed him back with open arms, but there was an unspoken tension in their interactions. Darren was no longer the same man they had known. Prison had changed him in ways they couldn't fully understand. One of the first places Darren visited was his old home, where his mother still lived. The reunion was bittersweet. She had stood by him throughout the trial and the years of incarceration, but the time apart had taken its toll. As they embraced, both mother and son felt the weight of lost time, years they could never get back. Darren also made a point to visit the local church, where he had once been an active member of the congregation. The church had been a pillar of support during his imprisonment, with the pastor often visiting him and the congregation praying for his release. Now, standing in the pews once again, Darren was greeted with a wave of emotions. The churchgoers welcomed him with warmth, but Darren knew that he had to rebuild his spiritual life from the ground up. Despite the warm reception, Darren was acutely aware of the challenges that lay ahead. His wrongful conviction had left scars, not just on him, but on his family, his friends, and his community. Some people avoided him, uncomfortable with the reminders of a justice system that had failed so spectacularly. Others, despite the exoneration, harbored doubts, whispers of suspicion lingering in the background. But Darren was determined not to let these obstacles define him. He began to channel his energy into positive action, seeking ways to give back to the community that had supported him. He started attending community meetings, sharing his story with young people, warning them about the pitfalls of the criminal justice system, and encouraging them to stay on the right path. As the days turned into weeks, Darren's presence in the community became a source of inspiration. His resilience, his refusal to be defeated by the injustice he had endured, resonated with many. Slowly but surely, Darren began to carve out a new life for himself. He found solace in reconnecting with old hobbies, jogging in the park, playing pickup basketball, and volunteering at the local food bank. However, the most significant step in Darren's journey back to normalcy came when he decided to pursue further education. With the support of a local non-profit organization dedicated to helping exonerees, Darren enrolled in a community college. He was determined to study law, driven by a desire to help others who might find themselves in the same nightmarish situation he had faced. His decision to study law stunned those around him. Many were moved by his courage, seeing it as a testament to his character and the strength of his spirit. Darren's choice was not just about seeking justice for himself, but about becoming an advocate for others, ensuring that no one else would have to endure the same ordeal. Darren's first day back in the classroom was a surreal experience. He had always been a bright student, but the years in prison had stolen more than just his freedom. They had interrupted his education, forcing him to abandon dreams that had once seemed within reach. Now, at a community college surrounded by students much younger than him, Darren felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The campus buzzed with energy, students hurrying between classes, their faces glowing with the optimism of youth. Darren, now in his early 30s, stood out among them, not just because of his age, but because of the life experience etched into his demeanor. He wasn't just here to learn, he was on a mission. His first few classes were challenging. The legal terminology and concepts, though fascinating, were completely new to him. But Darren was determined. Every night, he pored over textbooks, took meticulous notes, and pushed himself to absorb as much as he could. His professors noticed his dedication, and while some were aware of his past, they treated him like any other student, challenging him to excel. Darren's classmates were curious about him. Some knew his story, having seen it on the news, while others simply sensed that there was something different about him. At first, many were hesitant to approach him, unsure of how to relate to someone with such a unique background. but Darren's quiet determination and willingness to help others soon won them over. He quickly became a respected figure on campus, known for his insightful contributions during class discussions and his generosity in helping others understand difficult concepts. Darren's life experience gave him a perspective that many of his peers lacked, and he wasn't afraid to share it. He often spoke up during lectures, relating legal principles to his own experiences with the justice system, offering a first-hand account of how the law could impact a person's life. Outside of the classroom, Darren became involved in student organizations, particularly those focused on social justice and criminal reform. He shared his story at events and rallies, using his platform to raise awareness about the flaws in the justice system and the need for reform. His passion was infectious, and he soon found himself surrounded by a group of like-minded students who admired his courage and dedication. Darren's academic journey was not without its challenges. The trauma of his past sometimes resurfaced, making it difficult for him to focus. There were nights when the memories of prison haunted him, disrupting his sleep and leaving him exhausted. But each time he felt overwhelmed, Darren reminded himself why he was doing this, why it was so important to him to keep moving forward. One of his professors, a seasoned attorney who had spent years working in criminal defense, took a special interest in Darren. The professor recognized Darren's potential and began mentoring him, offering guidance on his studies and advice on navigating the legal field. Under his mentorship, Darren's understanding of the law deepened, and his resolve to use his education for good solidified. As Darren progressed through his courses, he began to think about his future in a new light. What had started as a quest for personal justice was evolving into something more, a desire to be a voice for the voiceless, to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. He started considering law school, a thought that both excited and terrified him. It was an ambitious goal, but Darren had faced bigger challenges before. By the end of his first year, Darren had not only caught up academically, but was excelling. His grades were among the highest in his class, and his professors often praised his analytical skills and deep understanding of the law. Darren's journey was far from over, but he was well on his way to becoming the person he had always dreamed of being, someone who could make a real difference in the world. As Darren continued to thrive in his studies, an unexpected opportunity came his way, one that would test everything he had learned so far. Midway through his second year at the community college, Darren's mentor, the seasoned attorney who had been guiding him, approached him with a proposition. "There's an internship opening at a prominent law firm downtown," his mentor said, his eyes searching Darren's for a reaction. "It's a highly competitive spot, but I believe you're more than qualified. You've shown exceptional dedication, and I think it's time you start applying your knowledge in a real-world setting." Darren was taken aback. An internship at a law firm was a significant step forward, an opportunity that could open doors to the legal world and help him build a career. But it was also intimidating. The idea of stepping into a professional environment, where his past might be scrutinized, filled him with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "Are you sure?" Darren asked, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I mean, with my background." His mentor cut him off. "Darren, you've proven yourself time and time again. Your background is part of who you are, but it doesn't define your future. This internship could be the chance you need to start building that future, to start making the impact you've always wanted." The words resonated with Darren. He had spent so much time proving to himself and others that he was more than his past, and now he was being given the chance to prove it in a professional setting. After a moment of contemplation, Darren nodded, determination filling his chest. "I'll apply," he said, his voice firm. The application process was rigorous. Darren spent hours perfecting his resume, and crafting a cover letter that highlighted his academic achievements, his dedication to legal studies, and his passion for justice. He was honest about his past, framing it as the catalyst for his commitment to law and his desire to effect change. Weeks passed after he submitted his application, each day filled with a mix of anticipation and doubt. He knew that his past could be a significant barrier, but he also believed in the strength of his story, how far he had come and how much he had achieved despite the odds. Then, one morning, Darren received the call he had been waiting for. The law firm wanted to interview him. The interview was scheduled for the following week, and Darren prepared meticulously. He practiced answers to potential questions, researched the firm's history and cases, and even rehearsed how he would address his past if it came up during the interview. On the day of the interview, Darren dressed in his best suit, a simple but well-tailored outfit that gave him a sense of confidence. As he entered the sleek, modern offices of the law firm, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Just a few years ago, he had been sitting in a prison cell, uncertain of his future. Now, he was walking into a law firm as a prospective intern. The interview went better than Darren had expected. The partners and senior attorneys who interviewed him were impressed with his academic record, his insight into legal matters, and his determination. When the topic of his past came up, Darren spoke openly and honestly, explaining how his experiences had shaped his desire to pursue law and how they had driven him to succeed in his studies. His sincerity and passion left a strong impression on the interviewers. They saw in Darren someone who had not only overcome significant challenges, but who also had the potential to bring a unique perspective to their firm. By the end of the interview, Darren felt a sense of accomplishment, regardless of the outcome. A week later, Darren received another call. He had been offered the internship. The news was a turning point for Darren. This opportunity wasn't just about gaining experience. It was a validation of his efforts, a sign that his past didn't have to limit his future. It was a step closer to realizing his dream of becoming a lawyer, of standing up for others and fighting for justice. As Darren prepared to start his internship, he knew that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to face it, armed with the knowledge and experience he had gained, and with the unwavering belief that he could make a difference. Darren's first day at the law firm was a mixture of nerves and excitement. As he walked through the glass doors of the high-rise building, he felt the weight of the opportunity before him. The bustling office was filled with sharply dressed attorneys, paralegals shuffling through stacks of paperwork, and the hum of phones ringing in the background. It was a far cry from the quiet classrooms he had grown accustomed to. He was introduced to the team he would be working with, a group of seasoned attorneys and eager young associates. Darren noticed the initial skepticism in their eyes. His background, after all, was not a typical one for a law firm intern, but he was determined to prove that he belonged there, that he was more than just a story of redemption. His first assignment was to assist in research for a high-profile case the firm was handling. The case involved a complex web of contracts and financial transactions, and Darren was tasked with sifting through mountains of documents to find any inconsistencies or evidence that could support their client's position. It was grueling work, requiring long hours and meticulous attention to detail. Darren dove into the task with fervor. He spent hours in the firm's library, poring over legal texts and case law, and when that wasn't enough, he took work home, staying up late into the night to ensure he didn't miss anything. His drive was fueled not just by the desire to impress, but by a deeper need to show that he was capable, that he could stand on equal footing with his peers, despite the obstacles he had faced. As the weeks passed, Darren's efforts began to pay off. He discovered a critical piece of evidence, an overlooked clause in a contract that had significant implications for the case. When he presented his findings to the lead attorney, she was visibly impressed. "This is excellent work, Darren," she said, her tone betraying a hint of surprise. "You've found something that could turn this case in our favor." The recognition was a turning point for Darren. Word of his contribution spread throughout the firm, and the initial skepticism that had greeted him began to fade. His colleagues started to see him not just as the intern with a troubled past, but as a valuable member of the team. However, with the recognition came greater challenges. Darren was given more responsibility, drafting legal briefs, attending client meetings, and even sitting in on strategy sessions. The workload was intense, but Darren thrived under the pressure. Each new task was an opportunity to learn, to prove himself, and to build the foundation for his future career. Despite the long hours and the stress, Darren felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He was no longer just a student or a man trying to escape his past. He was an active participant in the legal process, contributing to cases that had real-world implications. The work he was doing mattered, and it was a far cry from the life he had once known. But as Darren's reputation within the firm grew, so did the challenges. He was acutely aware that not everyone had fully accepted him. There were still whispers behind closed doors, still moments of doubt from those who couldn't look past his history. Darren knew that he would have to continue proving himself, day in and day out. One evening, after a particularly grueling day at the office, Darren sat alone in the firm's library, the soft glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows over the stacks of legal books. As he reviewed his notes for an upcoming meeting, he couldn't help but reflect on how far he had come. The journey had been anything but easy, but sitting there, surrounded by the tools of his trade, Darren felt a deep sense of pride. He was no longer defined by the mistakes of his past. He was shaping his future, one case, one document, one argument at a time. And in doing so, he was proving not just to others, but to himself, that he was capable of achieving greatness. As Darren's internship continued, he was entrusted with more critical assignments, and his confidence grew. However, the true test of his abilities came in the form of an unexpected challenge, one that would determine not only his future at the firm, but also the trajectory of his entire legal career. One morning, as Darren was settling into his work for the day, the managing partner, Mr. Collins, summoned him to his office. Darren felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Mr. Collins was known for being tough but fair, a man who valued results above all else. As Darren entered the spacious office, he was struck by the serious expression on the senior attorney's face. "Darren, I've been following your progress closely," Mr. Collins began, his voice measured. "You've impressed a lot of people around here, including myself. That's why I'm offering you an opportunity, a challenging one, but one that could set you apart from the rest." Darren listened intently as Mr. Collins explained the situation. A major client, a high-profile figure embroiled in a legal battle that had attracted significant media attention, needed someone to assist in preparing the defense. The case was sensitive and complex, with potential ramifications that could make or break careers. And the firm had decided that Darren should be part of the team. "We're under immense pressure to deliver," Mr. Collins continued, his tone grave. "This case will demand everything you've got and more. Are you up for it?" Darren felt a surge of mixed emotions, honor at being chosen for such a high-stakes case, but also anxiety about the pressure that came with it. He knew that failure was not an option. The consequences would be too great. Yet, this was exactly the kind of challenge he had been preparing for, the chance to prove himself on the biggest stage. "I'm ready," Darren replied, his voice steady despite the uncertainty he felt inside. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Darren was thrown into the deep end, working alongside some of the firm's most experienced attorneys. The case was a legal labyrinth, with layers of complexity that required not only sharp legal acumen, but also strategic thinking and the ability to anticipate the opposing counsel's moves. Darren's days started early and ended late. He reviewed countless documents, researched obscure case laws, and participated in intense strategy sessions that often extended long into the night. The pressure was immense, but Darren thrived in the environment. His ability to remain calm under stress, to analyze situations from multiple angles, and to contribute innovative ideas quickly earned him the respect of his colleagues. However, the case was not without its difficulties. The opposing counsel was relentless, and the media's scrutiny added another layer of stress. Darren often found himself working through the night, poring over documents in the firm's library while the city slept outside. One night, as he was reviewing a particularly dense contract, Darren's eyes landed on a clause that had been previously overlooked. It was a small detail, buried in legal jargon, but it had the potential to shift the case in their favor. His heart raced as he realized the significance of what he had found. The next morning, Darren presented his discovery to the lead attorney. The room fell silent as she read through the document, her expression slowly changing from skepticism to one of admiration. "This is a game changer," she said, looking up at Darren. "Good work." The moment was a turning point in the case. Darren's discovery gave the team the leverage they needed, and the entire strategy was recalibrated based on his findings. The trial, which had seemed daunting, now felt within reach. As the day of the trial approached, the tension in the firm was palpable. Darren felt the weight of expectations on his shoulders, but he also felt a sense of resolve. He had come too far to falter now. When the trial finally commenced, Darren sat in the courtroom, listening intently as the lead attorney presented their case. The atmosphere was charged, every word, every argument carrying immense weight. Darren watched as the opposing counsel attempted to counter their points, but the groundwork he had helped lay proved solid. As the trial reached its climax, it became clear that Darren's contribution had made a decisive impact. The judge's ruling was in favor of their client, a victory that was celebrated not just within the firm, but also in the broader legal community. Back at the firm, Darren was met with applause and congratulations. Mr. Collins approached him, a rare smile on his face. "You did an excellent job, Darren," he said, shaking his hand. "You've proven that you belong here." Darren felt a sense of pride and accomplishment that he had never known before. The journey had been long and arduous, but this victory felt like the culmination of all his efforts. He had not only met the challenge, but had exceeded expectations in the process. However, as the initial excitement faded, Darren knew that this was just the beginning. The legal world was demanding, and he would need to continue proving himself. But for now, he allowed himself to savor the moment, knowing that he had taken a significant step towards building the career he had always dreamed of. The victory in court marked a new chapter in Darren's life. With a high-profile case behind him, he had earned a reputation not just as a promising young lawyer, but as someone who could handle intense pressure and deliver results. The buzz around his name within the firm had reached new heights, and for the first time, Darren felt a true sense of belonging in this high-powered world. Offers began to roll in. Other departments within the firm wanted him on their projects, and even rival firms started to take notice. Darren was invited to networking events, exclusive dinners, and even asked to mentor incoming interns. His calendar was suddenly full, and while the pace was relentless, Darren thrived on it. This was the life he had worked so hard for. But amid all the success, Darren didn't lose sight of his roots. He remembered the people who had supported him on his journey, his family, his professors, and the community that had shaped him. He often thought about the obstacles he had faced, the times when he had been underestimated or overlooked because of his background. It fueled his drive to make a difference, not just for himself, but for others who might be in similar situations. One afternoon, after a particularly long meeting, Darren sat in his office, reflecting on how far he had come. The city skyline stretched out before him, a reminder of the opportunities and challenges that lay ahead. He thought about the young black students who might be looking up to him now, wondering if they could achieve the same success. Darren knew that his story could be a source of inspiration, but he also knew that he had a responsibility to give back. With this in mind, Darren made a decision. He reached out to his old high school and offered to start a mentorship program for students interested in law. He wanted to show them that their dreams were within reach, that with hard work and determination, they could overcome any obstacle. The school eagerly accepted his offer, and before long, Darren was back in the classroom, sharing his experiences and guiding the next generation of lawyers. The program was a success. Darren's mentor flourished under his guidance, and many went on to attend top universities, just as he had. Seeing their progress filled Darren with a sense of fulfillment that rivaled even his biggest legal victories. He knew that he was making a difference, that he was helping to pave the way for others to follow in his footsteps. As the years passed, Darren continued to climb the ranks at his firm. He took on more challenging cases, won more accolades, and eventually became a partner. His name was now synonymous with excellence, and his influence extended far beyond the courtroom. But despite all his success, Darren remained humble. He never forgot where he came from, and he continued to mentor young students, helping them navigate the same challenges he had faced. One day, as Darren was preparing for yet another high-stakes case, he received a letter. It was from one of his former mentors, a young woman who had just passed the bar exam. She wrote about how much Darren's guidance had meant to her, how his story had inspired her to keep going even when things got tough. She thanked him for believing in her, for showing her that anything was possible. Darren smiled as he read the letter, feeling a deep sense of pride. He had achieved so much in his career, but this, helping others achieve their dreams, was what truly mattered. It was the legacy he wanted to leave behind. Looking out at the city once more, Darren felt a profound sense of gratitude. His journey had been anything but easy, but it had been worth every struggle, every setback. He had faced adversity head-on and emerged stronger for it. And now, as a successful lawyer, mentor, and role model, he was ready to take on whatever challenges the future might bring. With renewed determination, Darren set the letter aside and got back to work. There were still battles to be fought, still injustices to be addressed. But Darren knew that he was ready for whatever came next, and that he would continue to make a difference, both in the courtroom and beyond.